talk. This time I'd like to share a little story from talking with a student friend of mine who's asking me, okay, it's all very well, this green, blue, red thing that you talk about a lot. I mean, if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is what I mean, like the behavior part. Talking green is talking about other, blue is about myself, and red is about common. So, he said to me, yeah, it's all great, but how do you tackle a conflict when somebody's actually thinking that you're wrong, that they're judging you, they're blaming you? How do you deal with blame? And it was a really nicely put question, because today when I look online, there's a lot of blame. It's always somebody's fault. It's always like pushing it outside. And I think the first thing to acknowledge is that, of course, I'm talking now about an external conflict with other people. But that applies also to your inner conflicts, like the inner child, inner parent talking to each other. But if we think about it in a simple way on the outside, somebody blames you. Essentially, the unlocking sentence that goes in my mind that I've learned off by heart is that person is not necessarily seeing you right now. They're seeing themselves. They're in suffering. They have a problem. They have an unfulfilled need of some kind. And so all of that is complicated. So what I just do is I think, you must have a good reason to whatever do, say, think, blame, or whatever. You must have a good reason. In their view, they have a good reason. They're probably doing the best they can. And even if it doesn't come out well, I'm thinking you must have a good reason to whatever, blame. And then suddenly my brain is calibrated to focus on the other person, and not just thinking about my own judgment, my own ego triggers, my own insecurities. Because it's a safe assumption to make that most of the time people opposite who are in conflict with you are in a state of insecurity and unwellness inside. They're not harmoniously in conflict with you. So therefore, the first thing to tackle is that fire of not feeling good about oneself. So rather than trying to judge that other person and think about how they're wrong and how you're right, just suspending that, keeping that for the journaling topic later, and going, you probably have a good reason right now to say whatever you do. And what is that? Could you help me understand what the need is? Not the feeling, the need, because the feeling is just the symptom of an unfulfilled need. That little unlocking sentence has saved my ass many times in conversations with utter, like, ridiculous conflicts that had nothing to do with something. It was just irrelevant conflict. Example, I was in a Zoom the other day talking to somebody, and they made an assumption that I don't even know what it was. They probably judged the fact that I was looking a bit less formal than others, and that triggered something in them that I could not understand. So instead of me going all defensive, I just said, like, you must have a good reason why right now you're saying that you want to end this conversation immediately. Would you be willing to help me understand? And this is what happened next. They said no. And well, that's fair enough. I received that no gratefully. But some people would go, no, I want to know. That's no longer respectful. But if you can take that no and walk away, then you've reduced the conflict. But if the person is actually brave enough to look into their own triggers, they might even say why, and they might open up their needs. And suddenly you go from a situation of conflict to a situation of actual trust building, and in a way, immediate healing for both parties, because it might be that they had a misunderstanding, or that they judged something without realizing, or it's one of their triggers that doesn't even belong to you, but it just happens that you were there and the one being triggering of that. So one thing you can take away is difficult situations occur all the time, but when you're actually facing somebody who's blaming you, you can always start from the premise that they have possibly good intentions, they're doing their best, and they have a good reason to say what they do, even if you don't understand it or judge it negatively. So that's something that I kind of use really regularly, because even though I'm working with conflicts and empathy, it does not mean that I'm not surrounded by conflicts, even in my own head. I get my inner parent come in and say to me, you should watch the news. And then my child's going, no, I don't want to watch all this negative news. There's a conflict right there. That child has a good reason inside me to not want to listen to the news. It's because I think that if I listen to it, I'm actually going to have to agree with it. And then I start to read books like, this is actually, by the way, a really good book. Bregman's book on the human nature of it's literally healing me at the moment. I'm loving reading the stories where he's bringing evidence about the fact that as humans, we're generally not such a bad species, actually, and that we're not as cynically evil as the Hobbesian point of view. He's more aligned with Rousseau. So worth reading if you haven't yet picked that book up. But what that book brought to me is this reminder that actually most people don't really want to be assholes with you. They just are in suffering and their needs are not fulfilled and they just can't figure out a way of handling that. And there you are in front of them. And then what can you do about it? Well, at least you can be kind and at least acknowledge that there is a need that is not actually yours, but that you might be able to help them understand by just giving them a chance to express it. And sometimes that's enough. So that's one of the things I've done about being green, focused on the other when there's a conflict, and getting some kind of transformation of that without really going too much into the deep conflict itself. May your weekend be great and not so conflictual.